So in the last video, we left off at full employment. One of the three objectives under macroeconomic policies often. And we were talking about that we want everybody to be working, because if we're not fully using all of our resources, then we're underproducing. And it turns out that there are often more people willing to work at the prevailing wages than there are people that are willing to hire them. There are more people willing to work than there are prevailing jobs. However, unemployment also results from labor skill inadequacy. So, sometimes there are jobs available and no willing workers for the job. An example of that could be a very hazardous job, a very high risk, dangerous job. Or maybe a highly skilled job, a job that requires a lot of skills. But maybe the people are just not willing to obtain these skills, or sometimes there are people just not willing to work these high risk, high skilled jobs. But whatever the cause, unemployment should be minimized to maximize resources. If we have unemployment, then that means we're not fully using our resources, meaning that we're leaving money on the table, essentially. So, as an economy, we should try to minimize the unemployment rate in order to try to maximize the usefulness of our resources, because labor is a resource within the macroeconomy. So, unemployment rates. How have they changed since 1979? In 1979, we had an unemployment rate of 5.8%. This was a time of expansion. This was a time of growing economy. And in about 1982, we had an unemployment rate of 9.5%. This was during a time of a recession. We were trying to lower interest rates, we were trying to lower inflation, and we were acting in a recession, and unemployment went up. In 2005, we had about 5% inflation. And in 2010, we had about a 10%, or not 5% inflation, 5% unemployment rate. In 2010, we had about a 10% unemployment. So we see that unemployment rates can increase, and then decrease, and then increase. And they will constantly increase and decrease over time based upon our macroeconomic monetary policies. The third thing that we want to try and obtain through our macroeconomic policies is economic growth. Economic growth is synonymous with prosperity. We want future generations to have as much or more than we did in our generation. We always want better for our children. We want better for our grandchildren. And we just want the next generation to have a better life than we did. That has always been the American dream. That has always been the American motivation. And that comes with economic growth. If our country is growing economically, then we can see this prosperity. We can see the next generation having it better than we did now. And we have seen that time and time again through our history. Economic growth has been largely affected by the history of our country. If we look back, we have economically grown as a country over and over and over again. For much of our history, we've experienced economic growth. And for much of our history as Americans, as an American country, we see that the future generations have always had it better, in the most cases, than the generation before us. So, initially in the United States, our economy grew as we settled and explored the vast expanse of the productive land. The motto back then was increase the resource base and the economy will grow. These were back shortly after the United States was colonized, and this was in the 18th and 19th century. During the 1700s, we kept expanding the Americas. First, we settled the 3 colonies, the 13 colonies, and then we moved on as far as we could into the Appalachian Mountains. Then we went past the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River. We went past the Mississippi River all the way to the Rocky Mountains, and then all the way to the West Coast. We kept expanding. Why? Because as we expanded, we acquired more resources. As we acquired more resources, then the economy grew. So during the late 19th century, additional personnel were needed to work the factories of the Industrial Revolution. So in the 1700s and the 1800s, most of that was we expanded our economy by acquiring more land, acquiring more resources. But by the late 19th century, in the 1880s and 1890s, we had these large industrial factories during the Industrial Revolution. We had these large factories. We were no longer acquiring more land, but we were still acquiring more resources. We started importing a lot of labor. We had a lot of immigration coming in. We needed a lot more labor for these factories of the Industrial Revolution, so we started importing, or we started encouraging a lot more immigration from European countries to fulfill this labor source, to increase our resources through more labor. So, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the U.S. economy experienced economic growth because we kept expanding our resources, whether that be through more land, or more labor, or more capital. That's how we experience economic growth. But now that we came about into the 20th and 21st century, economic growth has been based upon improved technological advancements. Manifest destiny was over approximately the end of the 19th century, and as we rolled around in the 20th century, there was really no more places for America to expand into. There was really no more land. We had already exhausted all of our resources as far as expansion of land. Then we started acquiring more labor as more resources. But by the 20th and 21st century, we realized as a country that the amount of resources that we have is about exhausted, but we must do something else to experience economic growth. That's where improvements in technology came in. It was right around this time that we see more technology really start emerging. And what do we remember from the first part of this class? As it shifts in technology, or technology, improvements in technology can shift the supply. Essentially, shifting economic growth. So whatever the source, economic growth is certainly one of the 3 objectives of a successful macroeconomic policy. So now we're going to begin talking about, or actually in the next video, we're going to start talking about how economic policy affects these 3 objectives.